Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. Today I have the exceptional pleasure of welcoming a good friend, Rabbi Daniel Feldman, who's a Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshiva University, also the Rav of Or Sadia, a author of numerous books, and an extraordinary scholar. Rabbi Feldman and I have had the privilege of working together on projects. I have had the privilege of learning from him and also of having one of my sons, Avi, in his shir as well. And so I thank him for his time. I thank him for his humility as I'm saying how wonderful he is. And welcome to Daytime Dialogues, Rabbi.
Thank you. It's good to be back in Chicago. And thank you for your overly kind words. I'll only agree with the part about being a good friend and about what his chus was to have Avi in the share. The rest, in the middle, you can forget about.
Okay, and I do owe you, when you come to Chicago, we have a date.
Yes,
Whether
that's
it's
for
going to
sure.
be Shalitz, KINS, just a drop off at Romanian, we'll figure something out on that as well. Rabbi
I'm looking
Feldman, I
forward.
really want to get started with a topic which you're an expert in, the
Cool.
question of Ben Adam L'Chavero. Rabbi Feldman has written numerous books on this topic of interpersonal relationships. And we live in a time where interpersonal relationships are extraordinarily challenged, where people's language is over the top and people are being challenged. There's no longer possibility for nuance. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, are there ways that we can bring people back into what we used to consider appropriate dialogue, appropriate conversation?
I hope so. I don't know back because I don't know when we were there. Maybe things are worse now than they ever have been, although things have been pretty bad in a lot of eras in American history and a lot of eras in world history. Context makes a big difference. It's hard to know when things were so wonderful, but I won't disagree that things are especially charged right now. And I guess as a rabbi speaking to a rabbi, we have to look to the parsha. Right? That's the obligation, and I think this week's parsha is particularly relevant to that question because we find that Eliezer goes on this mission to find a shidduch for Yitzchak, which is a wonderfully successful mission. He's looking for a woman of chesed, and he establishes this test, and it's so successful. He finds the greatest balas chesed, and yet you find in the Talmud, it's actually a criticism that's leveled at Eliezer that what he did smacked of the prohibition of superstition, and that the prohibition of nechush, Eliezer is the symbol for that somehow. It's very hard to understand because nechush usually means you're engaged in irrational activity, and here he was setting up a very rational, logical text. He's looking for a chesed, he's looking for kindness, and he sets up a test for kindness. And I thought that the message of that was whether he was actually guilty of superstitious behavior, I want to say superstitious behavior, or whether it was totally justified. The hint of criticism that you find in the Talmud is that it's appropriate to try to look for people with good mitos for sure, but when you assume that your test is 100% perfect in identifying good mitos, that's where there's a danger that even borders on superstitious behavior, and that's a huge stumbling block that we have in our thinking, that we feel that this activity represents this quality, and people who will do this activity, they have that quality. Or more relevant to the past few weeks and months, a certain political position or a certain individual associated with a political position, that represents the value. And if you agree, then you have the value. And if you don't agree, you don't. And it's a 100% correlation. And that's where there is such a great breakdown in human relationships, because people think that, oh, if he was really a nice guy, he would do this. If she really loved me, she would do that. And it's possible that he really is a nice guy and he still, for whatever reason, doesn't do this. And it's possible he does this and he's not a nice guy. And the assumption that our correlations are so perfect, it leads to a lot of discord, a lot of fighting. And I think that's a big part of why Lashon Hara is prohibited, because even if what you're saying is true, the human tendency to read too much into whatever happened and to assume that I can perfectly identify what character is behind this action is extremely dangerous. And in psychology, they call it the fundamental attribution error, the idea that, oh, I can assume when I see a certain activity happening, that tells me all I need to know about the person. That's what he's like. And you don't do it to yourself. When you do the same thing, it's circumstantial. There's always an excuse. So if that guy pushes somebody out of the way when he's on a line, it's because he's a jerk. And if I push people out of the way, it's because I'm in a rush and it's not typical and I've had a bad day and I have a good reason. It doesn't really represent what I'm about. So that idea that we can say it, we can learn everything we need to know about somebody just by looking at what they do, and we're so perfect at interpreting it, I think is very, very dangerous.
And in your shul,
Mm-hmm.
have some of
My
the,
shul is perfect.
well, your shul, well, yeah, let me talk about my shul instead.
Yes.
I always have been joking for the last 4 to 8 years that, well, actually just 4 years for sure, that there are two words I can never say from the pulpit: Obama and Trump. And the reason is because people make those attribution errors and make an assumption that if you say this or you say that, the feelings are so strong that all of a sudden everything else is put aside. Is
Yeah.
that something that you've encountered as well, whether it's in politics or politics, I guess let's talk about for a minute, since we're still, according to some, we're still in the middle of the election. Um, is that also the same experience you're finding among Balabatim, among communities?
Absolutely. And again, my shul is perfect, so I'm not talking about that.
I'll talk about mine. It's okay.
Right. But about overall, but with people, for sure, that's certainly it all flows from this mistake, I think. But certainly in the realm of politics, it is writ large to a tremendous degree. And there's kind of a tension where, on the one hand, you have people who say that it's not right for rabbis to be involved in politics, to talk about political positions or personalities. And on the other hand, you'll have those who say, well, how could you not? The issues are so important. The Dvarim Harumdim Omdim Barumo Shalom. So how could you not talk about politics? And it's a dereliction of duty to not talk about all of the values and the issues that are at stake. And the truth is, they're both right. But both positions are right, that the values are crucial and Omdim Barumo Shalom and incredibly important to discuss. But it doesn't mean that our perception of what perfectly represents those values is always correct. And we do have different assessments of how to prioritize, but also just how to get to the values in the first place. So priorities is also part of the mix, but it also comes on top of different assessments of reality and different assessments of personalities. And all of that has to be acknowledged. So both positions are true, that yes, the rabbis for sure have to be sensitive to the issues of the day that are so important and so crucial and touch the core of who we are. But at the same time, the lowercase p politics, the idea that therefore that value is only expressed through policy X or candidate Y, is where there is a big breakdown and where indeed it is dangerous for rabbis to assume they're right about that part of the equation.
So in your perfect shul, did you take the role of educating your community?
Not again, not in terms of right, any specifics about this election for the same kind of reason, but the overall values that we think are important that we want to express towards society. So that is certainly not a one-time thing. That's a constant refrain, and that's something that we need to build up on a foundation of expressing what are the core values, how could they manifest themselves in many different ways, and a consistent pattern of building on that and expressing that, and hoping that even if decisions go in different ways, but they are still educated decisions and they're still decisions that could reflect two different ways of applying a value rather than not understanding a value in the first place.
And to move a little bit in a different direction for a moment, this last week we lost two great rabbinic figures, David Feinstein Zatzal and Rabbi Jonathan Sachs Zatzal. And I think among their greatness, part of their greatness was their personalities. And I've heard many stories of Reb David. I was never privileged to know him. Did you have a chance to interact with Reb David Feinstein?
Not very much. Certainly had more to do with Rabbi Sachs. I did not really have direct family members who were close to him, and I certainly felt
Yeah.
the influence how to remove. And
Right.
through his writings, it was not zocha to really be personally connected.
He was, the stories go on and on in terms of his humility and everything from the fact that he didn't wear long coats like most Rosh Yeshivas did, or just the fact that his yeshiva remained on the Lower East Side. And Rabbi Sachs, you did have from his time at yeshiva and elsewhere. Is there a favorite story you might have from Rabbi Sachs from your interactions?
It's not a story that's going to really be a chiddush to anybody, but I found him to be somebody who's so available to be helpful personally and to share of himself so readily. And it's not only his understanding, which is and his perception and his perceptiveness and his insight, which I think is very obvious to people, but also it's his erudition and the readiness with which he could call upon a relevant point in conversation is extremely impressive. But again, I don't think I'm adding anything to what people know about him, because these are the kinds of stories that many people are sharing today, but sharing this week. But his ability to share of himself, his tremendous generosity of spirit, which you find of many great Gedolim. And if we only look, you don't have to, unfortunately, it's not just this past week. We know this year we've had such terrible losses, and it's not even, none of these that we're talking about are even from COVID, but two other figures who I would also share that mead also, who we lost recently, Rabbi Lam Zecher Tzadik Levracha and Reb Zalman Nechemia Goldberg Zecher Tzadik Levracha. I can also testify personally about both of them, that these are all individuals who had tremendous abilities and tremendous accomplishments in their lives. But one aspect that I saw with all of those three was just a tremendous generosity of spirit and being there to give of their time and their experience to younger people, and to, without any question and without any hesitation, and without any fear of anything, just to be ready to share what they have and what they were with people, and to bring tremendous benefit to individuals and to Klal Yisrael as a whole. It was really, I would say, those three great losses that I did know personally, I would say that was a mead that they all shared.
And it would be pretty simple to share, I guess, or to conclude that part of the definition of Gedolim among our people are those people who learn from the Yesharim, who learned from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, which all have the midah of sharing and working and being part and not being separate from.
Yeah.
And how do we teach that?
That's itself the big challenge. I think we can only teach it through the modeling and the appreciation that we express towards those who model it. And that's one of the lessons of Avram Avinu, and the fact that the Torah in last week's parsha goes into such detail about his chesed and about his acts of concern and kindness, and then immediately follows that up with HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying that I have recognized about him that he is someone I can build my nation on, because he will convey to those around him and to his household these values. So the role of a model is so crucial, and all of the lecturing and all of the teaching in the world is important, but it's not going to do anything compared to what modeling can do. And that's something which is a very powerful point, that be to witness these kinds of behaviors. And for those of us who aren't able to witness, but to hear stories, to tell the stories that have that impact. So as mentioned, Reb David, I didn't know, but I got to hear the stories from others. And it's interesting that his father, Reb Moshe Zatzal, has a comment about last week's parsha, that with all of the praise that we have for everything Avram did, we also find that Chazal have the statement, which sounds a little critical, that everything that he did personally, his descendants were repaid for through HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly, and what he did al yidei shliach was a step removed. It's hard to understand exactly what it's directed. It sounds like it's a little bit of a criticism. And even though what he did through a shliach, so Some of that was apparently through Yishmael. He was doing that for chinuch purposes, that he was involving him in the chesed so that he should also learn and he should know what to do. And that would seem really unassailable. What could be criticized about that? And here Moshe writes that despite that, and as much as that would be compelling, still there's no chinuch that's as powerful as the modeling. So even with all the modeling Avram did, and no one could accuse him of not modeling chesed, but with all of that, to subtract from that at all, to delegate to Yishmael, even as part of an effort of chinuch in of itself, subtracted from the chinuch, took away from some of that modeling that's so powerful.
So it's the role model. It's
Yeah,
providing those images for students. Do we do enough of that? Sometimes I feel
I
like
don't.
a Blat Gemara we have to do, or it's the story or what the essay we have to write. Do we provide enough of that experiential piece for our students?
I certainly don't, but my rebellion do, so I can tell stories about that, and I personally feel that my rebellion have done a spectacular job of modeling throughout all of my experience with them, but perhaps even all the more so these past few months when the world is in such a time of crisis, and Rabbi Shechter Shlita and Rabbi Willig Shlita have been so powerfully front and center in leading Klal Yisrael in what to do out of a sense of achrayus for Klal Yisrael. So I may not be modeling so much, but at least I can relate the stories and I can convey to the next generation what I've seen. And I think that we are very fortunate to have a lot of that happening. So I can't claim that I'm doing too much of it, but I think that there is a lot of it happening. Is it always recognized? Is it always appreciated? I don't know. I hope so. It's unfortunate that we live in a very media focused world because you're not always getting an accurate picture of that per se, especially through some of the general media channels. So I think it's unfortunate that sometimes not only is there a over crediting of what the media reports, and I'm not slamming the media overall, just saying that in the aggregate, you're not always necessarily getting a full picture from the media, both to the extent that not everything is necessarily accurate, but also certainly shouldn't assume that what's not there didn't happen. And so a lot of the modeling that I've seen from great Gedolei Yisrael is not always reported. So I think we need to do a better job of conveying it to others.
Well, there's a Ralbag, if I remember, in Shoftim that talks about the fact that when the Tanakh records life stories, it's normally the extremes. So we don't know about the day-to-day kinds of normal. And so we hear the extremes of good and extremes of bad, but the normal we don't always get to hear. But sometimes the normal is what provides for us the greatest opportunity to learn in our world. We extrapolate from the Tanakh what the normal may have been. Just to shift topics for a moment, that you are prolific as an author and as an editor. What books are you either editing or writing right now?
Well, as far as being prolific, the secret is, focus on quantity and not quality. That how to say, you figure hopefully you try to put out, but the editing, certainly those books, thank God, we have many high quality Sfarim that come out of Yeshiva. We have a series devoted to halacha in English and a series devoted to hashkafa in English, and there
Any
are
further
many.
volumes from Rabbi Wiederblin coming out yet?
Right, it's a new volume coming out from him on the Hashkafa, and we're working on putting through a few other projects from Rabbi Shechter, from Rabbi Bleich, from Rabbi Tendler. Some of it is working on budget, so that's also also something we're always on the lookout for. But we have a lot of projects that are in the pipeline that are going to be very illuminating to Klal Yisrael. As far as my own projects, I'm working on revising and bringing out a new version of one of my works on Chesed and Tzedakah in English, and in Hebrew, I'm almost finished with a volume on the nature of Dinim D'Rabbanan and the structure that animates that.
And in addition to all of that, you have a daily share?
Thank God. Yeah. Because Avi Matenki set a pattern that other
I
people
think
will follow.
I think I've mentioned to you, I've heard that he was your very first student who had registered for your share when you
And
first.
YP. Right. So everything follows that. So and they also started with him and with a strong Chicago contingent in the early days. So a lot of Hakaras Tov to Avi specifically and to the Chicago community as a whole. For
Are you giving share in person, or are you still doing it over Zoom?
at the moment at the moment I'm on Zoom.
Uh-huh.
I look forward, God willing, to coming back in person soon. They need to have a mixture of some shiurim in person and some shiurim online. So that's the way it's been
And
lined up at the moment.
and in terms of yeshiva, most of the fellows are back in person, or it's again that mixture of.
It's a mixture. It's not most, but it's a good amount that are back in person. Clearly, for spacing reasons, they can't have everyone come back at the same time, and not everyone's ready to come back. And so there's a mixture of factors that go into it. But there are a good number of Talmidim that are back on campus, and I have to say it's my tremendous appreciation for the leadership of Yeshiva University, from Rabbi Berman on down, and Rabbi Penner and Rabbi Kalinsky and everyone who's running the show is doing really a fantastic job of, ever since March when this started and through today, of creating a structure that is benefiting the Talmidim to the maximal degree, while also looking out for their safety to the maximal degree and bringing the perfect combination of responsibility and devotion and education in a very difficult balance, which I think they're carrying off to a tremendously impressive, impressive result.
You see this changing, yeshiva? Do you see that once COVID has been addressed in a way that we can be comfortable once again, and you're teaching in person, that there'll also be a simulcast, that there'll be Zoom, just like a lot of the shiurim are taped? You see this changing?
I don't think the daily shear is going to change that way because it's not perfect. We're very grateful for the technology, and there's no question it's so much better than it could have been otherwise. But for the daily shear experience, we really feel that to be in person is really crucial. And you mentioned the modeling, but also just the whole interaction, the whole experience. Definitely looking forward to that becoming the standard once again. But the potential for communication on a broad scale that's always there, but we just were forced to really work with over these past few months, I think it does very much open our eyes to what can be done for positive reasons and not just for negative reasons. And I think that will have a lasting effect, that it'll all coexist, not necessarily that the shiurim will be hybrid, because there's pluses and minuses to that. So I think the daily shiurim will ideally go back to a purely in-person format and be recorded for listening afterwards. But the ability of technology like Zoom and related technologies to allow for an interactive online long distance experience clearly has tremendous potential when utilized for positive reasons. And I think that that's going to be one of the positives that will emerge from this situation, that our eyes have been open to that and we'll find ways to utilize that.
One of the things the kids are bemoaning nowadays, that they think there will no longer be snow days.
Yes, it's a good question. What will ever happen to what will happen to snow days? For better or for worse, so we're finding out that there's a lot that can be accomplished, and I hope it'll be for better. I hope that we'll be able to hold on to what is so crucial about in-person instruction and not forget about all of the importance of that, but also see how we can utilize this technology for greater benefit.
I've asked a number of people who've been guests who are also rabbonim of shuls, in terms of the change in shul at KINS. We see that there are segments of the population who haven't returned to shul, some of them because of concern, some of them because of childcare,
Yeah.
and some of them because they just don't like going back to a situation which is so unfamiliar and complicated. Um, is the same thing happening in Orsaja despite its perfection?
This challenge is a challenge for everyone. There's no question that all of the rabbanim of the world, this is one of the few challenges that we have faced that really doesn't discriminate. That there are some challenges which hit some communities more than others, and which you can say, okay, I could go there and it's not going to be a problem, or I could go there, it'll be a different kind of problem. Here, I think all of Klal Yisrael, all over the world, is struggling with the same kind of considerations and the balance of trying to live a safe and responsible life right now with the need for education, the need for spiritual inspiration, the need for community, the need for in-person friendship, and everything that that brings is enormously stressful on everyone. And for the rabbis who have to try to navigate that for their communities and for the broader population, it's an unprecedented kind of stress. There's no question. And there's going to be holes. There's going to be cracks that people are going to stumble through, and for reasons that are understandable. And that's a part of what we're struggling with. I think every rabbi is struggling with right now, and we'll still be struggling with, God willing, when this crisis is over, that they'll have to figure out how to pick up the pieces and how to bring people back in a way that is effective. And that's part of also hoping that we'll be able to hold on to the positives that we've learned during this time, while also fixing whatever needs to be fixed.
There will be some fixing. I think some of the pomp and circumstance that has been part of large shuls will change because people have gotten used to fast minyanim, so we maintain time frames, smaller minyanim. It'll be very interesting. I haven't sung Aleinu in 9 months. Not sure I always miss it, but I don't know we haven't sung. Things like that. The drasha is half the length when it's in person. And we just keep on trying to find ways to be safe, and it's changing the nature. It'll be a fascinating change, but hopefully Latov. Maybe it'll be one of those defining moments as well. Rabbi Feldman, our time has really lapsed, and I really appreciate all of your time and all of the things you do on behalf of Klal Yisrael, your shul, your serving as Rosh Yeshiva, your ability at Psak, your editorship of the YU Reads press, and all of the things that keep on coming out. And most importantly, the good humor that you bring to all interactions in which I've encountered you. So I thank you so much. I thank you for your time, and I thank everyone for listening in. And please God, it should be a very, very successful new year within your teaching and continuing to teach all of us. So thank you so much.
Amen. Thank you so much for everything you do, for everything that you have modeled, for all of the chasadim that you have shown Klal Yisrael and me personally and your family. And we should all know better and happier times in the very near future.
Amen. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, Rabbi. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too.